a forgotten advanced civilization, a secret hidden in the ancient Sphinx in Egypt, and the real Atlantis finally found. We are diving deep into some of the craziest ancient civilization theories Joe Rogan has spoken about on his podcast. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the advanced civilization. There's a claim that might keep you up at night. During Joe Rogan's conversation with Graham Hancock, the two discussed the idea of a civilization so old it dates back to the last ice age. Graham says bluntly, a major advanced civilization existed more than 12,000 years ago. That puts us in a timeline that shatters the usual textbook story, which insists major civilizations only popped up a few thousand years before Christ. The conversation references the Younger Dryas impact theory, more on that later, suggesting multiple comet fragments slammed into Earth around 12,800 years ago. If that really happened, entire cultures might have been wiped out, leaving behind only scattered hints like mysterious megalithic sites. Some archaeologists, like one featured in the same episode, Flint Dibble, are deeply skeptical, but as Hancock puts it, we have forgotten an episode of the human story, and he wants to find out exactly which chapter was torn from the record. Next, we are talking about Gockley Tey. Gockley Tey gets thrown into the spotlight for fueling suspicions of an ancient apocalypse. On the Joe Rogan Experience, Graham Hancock points to this 11,600-year-old site in southeastern Turkey as the smoking gun. He describes stone pillars weighing tons that were arranged at a time conventional wisdom labels a simple hunter-gatherer era. If these were just tiny bands of nomads, how did they manage such advanced stonework? Hancock hints it's evidence they inherited skills from a lost society. In the episode, there's talk about a lost civilization that existed well before recognized ancient cultures, and Gockley Tey becomes the prime suspect, challenging folks who assume civilization just started out of nowhere in places like Sumer. Next up, we are talking about the Sphinx secret. The Sphinx might be holding an age-old secret that rewrites everything about ancient Egypt. Hancock references a geologist's rain weathering argument, saying that there's heavy rain weathering on the Sphinx enclosure, which could make it 9,000 or even 10,000 years old, way beyond the Old Kingdom's timeline. What sets chills down your spine is Hancock's suggestion that the Sphinx may have aligned with the constellation Leo around 12,000 plus years ago. I don't think anyone knows how they did it, Rogan remarks, referring to those incredible monuments. The episode quotes an archaeologist, Flint Dibble, who dismisses these claims, but the conflict remains. If that sculpture really is thousands of years older than standard history says, are we missing an entire layer of advanced Egyptian prehistory? Next up, we are talking about Atlantis. Atlantis is more than just a myth, if you ask this crowd. In the episodes, Hancock emphasizes that Plato got the story from Egyptian priests who apparently told Solon about a massive flood destroying a powerful civilization. So maybe it's not just some Greek philosopher's fantasy. Joe Rogan and guests compare these tales to global flood myths, cultural memories of real cataclysms. We've had so many of these flood traditions, Hancock points out, hinting that they all might be referencing the same meltdown at the end of the Ice Age. The terrifying thought is that a sophisticated empire was wiped off the map, leaving behind only the vaguest legends about a sunken land. Next, we are talking about the Olmec colossal heads. Olmec heads spark talk of ancient connections across the seas. On Rogan's podcast, Hancock mentions those colossal stone heads in Mexico, dated around 1000 BC, but sporting features nobody can fully explain. Could there have been transoceanic voyages long before Columbus? These legends aren't just made up, Hancock insists, suggesting older influences might have seeded knowledge in places like Mesoamerica. Critics fire back, saying mainstream archaeology sees no proof of major sea travel back then, yet the notion that some bearded teachers popped up in the New World keeps fueling theories of a shared prehistoric culture. Next, we are talking about about the stone spheres in Costa Rica. The stone spheres in Costa Rica get a nod as another unsolved puzzle. Hancock references these perfectly round boulders, some bigger than a car, that mainstream scholars date to around 500 to 1500 CE. Yet he argues no one really knows their age because stone is notoriously hard to pin down. Joe Rogan calls them a total mystery, and the speculation ramps up. Did they come from a pre-flood society with advanced tools, or are they just the result of local artisans? The episode captures that sense of awe, with Hancock insisting they could be leftovers of an earlier epoch that we haven't even considered yet. Next, we are talking about the missing history. An overarching claim that hits hard is the idea that we missed an entire episode of humanity's saga. We've forgotten an episode of human history, Hancock says, laying out how megalithic structures, possibly comet impacts, and swirling legends all converge on a single conclusion. Some primal civilization thrived in the late Ice Age, then vanished under violent cataclysms. Joe Rogan, clearly fascinated, hammers on the point that mainstream archaeology might not be completely wrong, but could have huge blind spots. This tension sets the stage for a more sinister question. If advanced societies got obliterated once, could it happen again? In our number 3 spot today, we are talking about the Younger Dryas impact theory. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis demands attention as one of those topics from Rogan's interviews that sounds like it's sci-fi, but might be rooted in actual, real science. Graham Hancock aligns with the researchers finding nanodiamonds, platinum anomalies, and other cosmic markers suggesting that Earth got hammered by comet fragments 12,800 years ago. Flint, the archaeologist, fires back that recent papers refute a large-scale impact, but Hancock is not convinced. He references Randall Carlson's work, impact proxies spanning large swaths, implying that if the event was catastrophic, entire cultures would have been vaporized. That angle might explain the near-total absence of direct evidence for such an advanced Ice Age civilization. Next up, we are talking about Gunang Padang. This place in Indonesia enters the ring as a bizarre hillside that some suspect might contain layers from 20,000 years ago. On one podcast episode, Hancock describes it as a possible pyramid hidden under centuries of soil and vegetation. Skeptics, including some from the episode, Flint Dibble, say deeper scans are misread or that it's just natural formations, but supporters retort that a lost civilization, as Hancock phrases it, could have built the lower terraces well before mainstream timelines. If the site truly goes back that far, it might be physical proof that people had complex building techniques when woolly mammoths were still roaming around. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Eye of the Sahara. The Eye of the Sahara caps off this wild list by being pitched as the literal site of Atlantis. During that Mauritania-themed discussion, both speakers compare the geological and historical details to Plato's words about concentric rings of land and water, matching stone colors red, black, and white, and other features described by Plato make the location eerily on point. Rogan's show even dives into how catastrophic flooding, possibly tied to the Younger Dryas meltdown, could have obliterated that city. Perhaps the creepiest angle is that Egyptian records might have referenced this exact place, meaning the biggest archaeological smoking gun in history could be sitting in plain sight in the Sahara. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye.